Hi, my name is Lenora, and the day after my wedding, my mother-in-law showed up at my front door with a notary and a pen already uncapped. She didn't say congratulations. She said, "It's time to sign." I hadn't even unpacked my suitcase, and suddenly everything, my marriage, my family, my future, wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. They thought I'd be too in love, too polite, too blind. But I had one secret left, something I never told anyone, not even my husband. So tell me, have you ever realized too late that someone planned your silence? Before we begin, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I want to know who's hearing this, because if this could happen to me, it could happen to you. The house felt like it was holding its breath. There were still petals on the staircase from the bouquet toss. A half-empty champagne flute sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, the bubbles long gone flat. My heels were by the door, like they'd given up halfway through the night. And the silence. God, the silence. It wasn't peace. It was too clean, like something had been scrubbed away. Marlo was still asleep upstairs. Or maybe pretending to be. I didn't go up to check. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in one of his flannel shirts, drinking bitter coffee that I didn't really want. My wedding dress, crumpled in a dry cleaning bag on the armchair, looked like it belonged to someone else. I guess in some ways it did. That girl, yesterday's bride, hadn't met Delphine like this. Marriage. It's funny how fast it can shift. I'd been someone's wife for less than 24 hours, and already I was wondering if I'd misunderstood the assignment. My grandfather used to say, "Don't put all your cards on the table till you see who's watching." He wasn't talking about love, he was talking about survival. The doorbell rang. Not a knock, a bell, sharp, quick, unapologetic. I looked at the clock, 8:07. Nobody with good intentions shows up at 8:07 on a Sunday morning, the morning after your wedding. I stood slowly, the kind of slow where your feet feel heavier than they should. Opened the door without thinking. Delphine stood there in a pale gray suit, like she'd just stepped out of a boardroom. Her lipstick was perfect. Her smile was warmer than the weather, but her eyes weren't smiling. "Good morning, darling," she said, already stepping inside. Behind her was a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, navy tie, stiff posture. He gave me a curt nod as he entered. "Sorry to drop in so early," Delphine continued, setting her leather bag on the table like this was her house. "But this shouldn't take long." The notary was already opening a briefcase. I hadn't even said a word. She pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table, just missing my coffee mug. A stack of papers, neatly clipped. A black pen rested on top of them, already uncapped. I stood there, barefoot, blinking at it like it might vanish if I stared hard enough. "It's just a little formality," Delphine said, brushing imaginary lint from her jacket. "Post-nup. Completely normal. You know how things are nowadays. Everyone has to protect what's theirs." I opened my mouth, then closed it. She kept talking. "It's for the family's sake, really, just to keep everything clear and tidy." The notary remained quiet, professional. Marlo still hadn't come downstairs. I sat. My fingers hovered near the edge of the papers, but I didn't touch them. The pen was pointing at me, like an arrow. I looked at Delphine's face, perfect, practiced, and felt something shift in my ribs. This wasn't spur of the moment. This had been prepared. I glanced toward the stairs. He knew. I didn't need him to say it. His silence was enough. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was agreement, permission. So that's how it was. The room stayed quiet, except for the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. I heard my grandfather again. "The minute you let someone else decide for you, you lose twice." I looked back down at the papers. One line, one signature. That's all it would take. I picked up the pen, not to sign, just to hold it. My hand felt steady, but my chest wasn't. "I'd like to take some time to review this," I said. Delphine didn't flinch. She smiled the way people do when they're pretending to understand. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." But she didn't take the papers back. She stood, adjusted her jacket, and turned to the notary. "Let's give her some space." They left. No hugs, no congratulations, no trace of yesterday's joy. Just the documents on the table and the uncapped pen. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe too deep. I stared at the pen they left behind and understood for the first time that this had been decided long before I said I do. I stayed at the table long after the door clicked shut behind them. The pen was still there, cap missing, ink tip hovering like it had been waiting all along. The indent in the wood where the folder sat was faint but visible, like the weight of it had pressed more than paper into the surface. Eventually, I stood. My coffee had gone cold. I dumped it down the sink and ran the water a little longer than necessary. I rinsed the mug twice, then wiped the counter even though it was already clean. Folding the dish towel over the oven handle, I noticed my hands were shaking. It was barely 11 a.m. The light through the window had shifted, but the stillness hadn't. I told myself to breathe. Told myself I'd feel better after some food. I opened the fridge, stared, then shut it. The thought of eggs or toast or anything at all made my stomach pull tight. I heard him come downstairs, socks on hardwood, quiet. Marlowe didn't call out, didn't say my name, just walked in and leaned on the opposite counter like we were strangers sharing a kitchen at a bed and breakfast. "I didn't hear you come down," I said. "Didn't want to wake you," he replied, eyes on the floor. I turned. "You were awake?" He nodded. So he'd heard the bell, the voices, the notary's leather briefcase clicking open, my voice asking for time. I didn't ask why he didn't come down, not yet. Instead, I leaned against the sink, arms crossed, watching him like he might disappear if I blinked too hard. "Why did your mother bring legal documents here? On our first morning as husband and wife?" He shrugged, like I'd asked him why she brought fruit salad instead of muffins. "It's just how my family handles things. Everything clean and clear, no surprises." I stared. "You knew she was coming?" Another pause. "She mentioned it. Just a formality. Nothing to worry about." My laugh was short and sharp. "A formality usually comes before the wedding." "It's just paperwork, Lenora." "You had a notary in the kitchen before I'd even had coffee." He stepped closer. "She just wants to make sure everyone's protected." "Protected from what? Me?" He flinched, but only a little. "You're reading too much into this." That was it. That was the line that did it. I didn't say anything for a moment. My chest felt too tight, like air had to find a new route just to get in. I looked at him, not just at his face, but through it, trying to see the version of him from yesterday. The man who danced with me under the string lights. The man who whispered forever against my neck when no one else was looking. He was still there, but now he came with a caveat. "You're reading too much into this." I knew that line. I'd heard it before. From teachers who'd belittled questions, from doctors who didn't listen, from men who didn't want to admit something hurt. It was a dismissal dressed as reassurance, and it made me feel small. "You didn't think I should know?" "It would have upset you," he said, "and yesterday was supposed to be happy." "Yesterday was happy," he nodded. "Exactly. But today is real." We stood like that for a beat too long. He didn't reach for me, didn't step forward or even try to soften what was said. I waited for him to say it was a mistake, that it was out of his hands, that he didn't know she'd bring the notary so soon. Anything. But he didn't object. He just let it sit there. And in that silence, I realized this wasn't about miscommunication. This was a choice, a quiet agreement sealed without my input. The formality wasn't the paper, it was me. I turned away and reached for the dish towel again, wiping the same clean counter for the third time. "I need some time," I said. He nodded, too easily. "Of course, take all the time you need." That was what unsettled me most. The ease. There was no, "I'm sorry." No, "let's talk it through." Just acceptance. Like he'd expected me to comply eventually, and my hesitation was just part of the process. I didn't look back at him. I heard his footsteps as he walked away, slow and even. A door opened somewhere, maybe the den. It closed softly. I stayed in the kitchen. Dishes were clean, counters spotless. No trace of breakfast, no sign of celebration. Just the pen on the table, still uncapped. That was when I understood that silence in this family wasn't accidental. It was policy. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, staring out the kitchen window, past the fence, past the neighbors' blooming azaleas, to the edge of nothing in particular. My body was still in the room, but my mind had stepped out the back door. I left the kitchen, my footsteps slow on the stairs. I wasn't looking for Marlowe. I didn't want another word. I just needed distance. From him, from her, from that pen still resting on the table like a dare. The guest bedroom upstairs hadn't been touched since the wedding prep. A quiet space, blank walls, unopened boxes meant for later. I sat on the edge of the bed, kicked off my slippers, and let my shoulders sink. The house was too quiet, but this room, it had no memories in it yet. No decisions, just space. That's where my mind drifted, to the space before all of this. When I was a girl, maybe 7 or 8, I learned something that stuck with me. Being agreeable kept the water calm. I was the youngest of 3. My brothers were loud, messy, full of opinions. I was the one adults said was so easy. That sounded like praise at the time. But I learned quickly that easy really meant quiet. Not a problem. I used to hold my breath when the tension rose. Mom's clipped tone, Dad's closed fists on the dinner table. I didn't talk back. I smiled. I made fewer waves. And it worked. They let me be. I slipped through. That skill stayed with me. I kept it through high school, through awkward first jobs, through relationships where I apologized for things I didn't do, just to keep the peace. Some people call that survival. I guess it was. But after a while, it becomes muscle memory. And then there was Grandpa Calder. He was different. He wasn't loud like Dad or smug like my older brother. He was sharp, deliberate, always watching people like he was piecing together a puzzle they didn't know they were part of. He used to take me out to the shop behind his house, a cramped, dusty place filled with half-finished projects and coffee cans full of screws. I'd sit on the old stool while he worked. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered. He'd say things like, "People will always want to know what's in your pocket before they've earned your trust." Or, "When someone rushes you, it's not because they're in a hurry, it's because they don't want you thinking too long." But there was one thing he said that stayed tucked in my back pocket for years. Never let anyone rush you into signing away what took you years to become. I was maybe 15 when he told me that. We weren't even talking about contracts, just about life. I didn't fully understand it then, but something about the way he said it stuck to my bones. It came back to me today, not during the moment with Delphine, not even when I looked at Marlowe and realized he wasn't surprised. It was later, sitting here, alone in this room with pale blue curtains swaying in the late afternoon light. I could hear the dryer tumbling in the distance, a dull reminder that life moves forward even when your footing slips. That sentence, it didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt pointed, like Calder had whispered it to me through time. I thought about the company, my grandfather's company, The one he left in my name when I turned 29. It wasn't just money, it was structure, it was stability. It was built from sweat and stubbornness, and every brick had a story. I hadn't told Marlo about it, not because I was hiding it out of shame or greed. I just knew better. I'd seen how people changed when they saw numbers, when value had a dollar sign. I learned early that people respect your silence when they think you have nothing to protect, and they resent it when they realize you do. Delphine didn't bring that pen for formality. She brought it because they expected me to fold. They assumed my silence meant surrender. They mistook caution for weakness. I thought about the way Marlo looked at me downstairs. Not guilty, not cruel, just resigned. Like this was all part of the plan, and I was just the last one to catch up. It hit me then that I had spent a lifetime training myself to be agreeable, and now someone was using that very instinct to box me in. The thing is, when you build a life out of being easygoing, you don't notice how often you're edited out of your own story. You become the background character to other people's decisions. That realization didn't make me angry, not yet, but it settled in my chest like something I'd have to deal with soon. I stood up and walked over to the window. The sky was shifting into that golden haze of early evening. Another hour, maybe 2, and it'd be dark. I didn't know what dinner would be. I didn't know if Marlo would knock on the door or just leave me be. But I knew this. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see the game being played around me. And I couldn't play by rules I didn't write. I didn't know it then, but the paperwork waiting for me wasn't about protection. It was about control. The living room had gone dim. Only the soft glow of a side lamp reached into the corners, casting long shadows across the rug. I stood by the table where the documents still sat, untouched, like they were waiting to be reconsidered. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I poured myself half a glass of water, but it just sat on the counter, untouched like everything else. My body felt awake, but my mind was running ahead, looking for something I couldn't quite name. I pulled the papers toward me, not to sign, just to study. The folder creaked open, legal formatting, standard phrasing. But the details, those were more telling. I skimmed page after page until something stopped me cold. A creation date, auto-stamped in the footer. The file had been finalized a full week before the wedding. I read it again, same date, no mistake. This wasn't rushed together yesterday in some scramble to protect family assets. This had been drawn up deliberately, printed, notarized, and held, ready. My pulse thudded, but I stayed seated. I made myself reread everything from the top, eyes slow and steady, forcing calm into my fingertips. No highlighter, no red pen, just my breath and a growing weight pressing down on my chest. I told myself not to react, not yet. I folded the documents and slid them back into their folder. I wasn't going to make a scene in an empty house. I wasn't going to scream into silence. I needed facts first, but I needed to hear someone say it out loud. Delphine was in the back den. I could hear the faint hum of the TV, something cheerful playing far too loud for this hour. I walked in, calm as I could manage. She muted the screen before I spoke. "I was looking over the paperwork," I said. Her lips curved politely, like this was all just a neighborly check-in. "There's a timestamp," I continued. "The documents were drawn up before the wedding. Why would that be?" She didn't blink. "We like to be prepared in this family." I waited. No elaboration. She added, "You know how many things get lost in the shuffle once newlyweds start traveling or settling in. We thought it'd be best to have everything ready ahead of time." My husband, back when he was alive, always said a family business runs smoother with structure. We've just kept that rhythm. That doesn't explain why I wasn't told. Her expression tightened just for a second. then it vanished. I assumed Marlo mentioned it. He's never been the most detail-oriented. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I could see how carefully the story had been rehearsed, practiced, pitched as logic, not strategy. Then she said it, quiet but sharp. "Don't make this complicated, Lenora." There it was. No raised voice, no accusation, just a simple line spoken like advice. But it wasn't advice, it was a ceiling. I nodded slowly, like I understood. But something in me shifted. Marlo entered the room, phone in hand, thumb tapping out a message. He glanced up. "Everything okay?" I turned to him, studying his face. No panic, no curiosity, just mild inconvenience. I said, "Your mom tells me this paperwork was ready before we got married." He hesitated, only a flicker, and then nodded. "It was just easier that way." "Easier for who?" He didn't answer that, just shrugged, like the details didn't matter. "We're all just trying to make things smooth, Len," he said. "No drama. It's standard." That word again, standard. Like I was overreacting. Like I should have been grateful for the efficiency. I looked from him to his mother, and something locked into place. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a system. Everyone knew the parts they were supposed to play, except me. I excused myself without another word, walked down the hall to my study, closed the door behind me. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter. I sat at the desk, turned on the lamp, and laid out the folder again. I didn't open it this time. I just stared at it, like it might speak if I gave it long enough. I thought of Grandpa Calder, how he never sugar-coated the world, how he always told me to check under the surface, to watch how people moved, not just what they said. His voice echoed in my memory, not with comfort, but with precision. They planned this, before the vows, before the dress fittings, before the dinner to meet my side of the family. While I was picking flowers and choosing songs, they were drafting paperwork, and it wasn't because they didn't trust me. It was because they expected me to comply, because I'd been raised to keep things smooth, because I smiled and nodded, because I didn't raise hell. They counted on that. So now I had a choice. I could push back, loud, emotional on their terms. Or I could observe, gather, and understand what this really was. Not just the paperwork, but the machine behind it. If they had planned this so carefully, I needed to understand exactly what they thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. The house fell silent not long after 10. I heard Marlo close the bedroom door, the low creak of wood and the shuffle of footsteps across carpet. But I stayed in my study, cross-legged on the old leather chair my grandfather once sat in, with nothing but a cold cup of coffee and a yellow notepad in front of me. Something in my bones said, "Don't let this go." Not yet. I moved to the kitchen for a refill, flipping on the overhead light. The brightness was harsh, surgical. But maybe that's what I needed, clear, clinical light. I pulled the coffee pot from the warmer. The glass hissed slightly against the counter. It was almost midnight when I went back to the documents. I didn't touch the folder this time. I reached instead for a different drawer, one that held older files, things I hadn't looked at since before the engagement. Original trust paperwork, letters from Calder's estate attorney, copies of everything from the firm that handled my shares when I bought out the smaller stakeholders. Everything in that drawer had my name on it, not ours. Just mine. That mattered. I opened my laptop and logged into my secured archive account. Dozens of folders lined the dashboard. I clicked into the one marked Tax and Compliance, scanning filing receipts from the last 3 years. According to Delphine, the paperwork had been urgent. Her words echoed now, falsely warm. If it's not signed by end of month, there'll be penalties, audits, legal headaches. We're just trying to keep you protected. But when I pulled up the tax schedule for the family trust, Marlo's side, The deadlines weren't even close. Nothing due for another 60 days. No audit risk flagged. She'd made it sound like a fire drill. It was a fire drill with no fire. I leaned back and stared at the screen. My pulse was steady, but my jaw was tight. This wasn't just oversight. This was manufactured pressure, a setup dressed in concern. I clicked into the metadata of the scanned documents they brought. Same timestamp as before, over a week before the wedding. I checked the audit log. No last-minute updates, no added urgency from any accountant or counsel. Only Delphine's voice, suggesting urgency, leaning on me in that slow, polished way that left no room to argue without looking ungrateful. The lie was quiet, but it was there. I rested my hand over the notepad. I wrote down, urgency, + false. Reason, + leverage. My handwriting was neater than I expected, focused, detached. I wrote like someone preparing for court, not conflict. For a moment, I sat in stillness. The refrigerator buzzed. Somewhere in the walls, an old pipe knocked once. I knew I could march down the hall, throw the door open, demand answers. But they wouldn't give me the real ones. If I accused them now, I'd look paranoid, emotional. You've always been so sensitive, Lenora. Just relax. That was how they got people to step back, to sign, to disappear behind a well-pressed curtain of decorum. I flipped to a fresh page, started a list, not of what they'd done, but of what they thought I didn't see. The language they used, the documents already prepped, the notary brought into my home without my knowledge, the way Marlowe avoided direct answers. A strategy unfolded before me, not illegal, not overtly cruel, but manipulative, precisely engineered to keep me in the dark just long enough to sign something I'd never be able to undo. I made digital copies of the signed but unfiled papers, stored them offline, then opened a secure drive and backed up the emails. I sent a quiet message to my personal attorney, flagged as non-urgent, so it wouldn't raise alarms if anyone snooped. I didn't want to ask questions yet. I just wanted him to know something was shifting. Silence had always been my default, but now it was a tool. This wasn't about playing nice. It was about staying sharp. I closed my laptop. The kitchen clock read 4:42 a.m. The sky was still dark outside, but I could feel the edge of dawn rising. I poured myself another cup of coffee, black this time. No sugar, no cream. Something about the bitterness felt right. By sunrise, I knew the urgency wasn't real, but the trap was. I stayed in that kitchen until the sun broke over the ridge. It spilled across the floor slowly, like it was afraid of waking the truth. Around 9, I made myself a small breakfast, toast, mostly untouched, and sat in my home office, reading through emails like it was any other Monday. It wasn't. Marlowe was somewhere in the backyard, trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. His silence had grown more purposeful lately. Less absent-minded, more strategic. I recognized that now. At 10:13 a.m., a new email dropped into my inbox. The subject line read, ERSI's coordination notes. Harmless enough. I almost deleted it without reading. But the sender name, it wasn't Delphine. It was someone from their accounting team. Someone I didn't know. Someone who, based on the long thread below, didn't realize I was on the CC line. I scrolled. Buried halfway down the chain was a line that stopped me cold. We'll proceed after she signs. No flourish, no ambiguity, no pretense. They weren't waiting for me. They were waiting on me. Like I was a stamp on a form, not a living person with a brain and a legacy. My breath caught, not like fear. More like I'd been slapped in a room full of people pretending nothing happened. My ears buzzed, my throat tightened. I set the laptop down gently, like it might burn through the desk. There it was. Confirmation. All the restraint I'd shown, all the time I'd taken to verify and stay rational, It led to this sentence: "Will proceed after she signs." I wasn't even named. Marlowe came in not long after. I didn't say a word at first. He stood in the doorway, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag from the garage. "Everything okay?" he asked, like he hadn't spent the past week watching me unravel silently. I turned the screen toward him. "You want to explain this?" He squinted, then read. His face didn't change. "I mean, they're just talking logistics," he said, shrugging slightly. "They assumed you'd sign, that's all." "That's all," I echoed. He sat across from me, carefully avoiding my eyes. "You're reading into it." There it was again, that family motto: don't make it complicated. They planned what would happen after I signed, Marlowe. Not if, after. His fingers drummed lightly on the edge of the table. "Lenora, this isn't a conspiracy. It's just business. You're part of the family now, and this is how things get done." "No," I said softly. "This is how people get erased." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And in that pause, I saw it. He wasn't surprised, just hoping I wouldn't notice. I turned back to the screen. My pulse had steadied. I clicked Reply All. No drama, no accusations. Just one line. "For clarity, I have not signed any documents, and I will not be doing so under pressure. All future communication on this matter should be directed through my counsel." Then I added 2 more CCs, my own attorney and a longtime associate from Calder's old firm. People who wouldn't be quiet. I hit send. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was loaded, calculated. 10 minutes passed. No reply. 20. Nothing. Marlowe cleared his throat. "You didn't have to loop everyone in like that." I looked at him. Didn't I? He didn't answer. I stood up, walking past him toward the dining room where the morning sunlight now stretched across the table like it owned the place. The same table where they'd laid out the papers, assuming I'd go along quietly. I stopped at the edge of the room, hand resting on the back of a chair. "Do you know what it feels like," I said slowly, "to realize people see you as a signature, not a person?" Marlowe looked down at his hands. The room went quiet, but I knew that wasn't the end of it. When someone like Delphine smiled and said nothing, that silence had a pulse, and it throbbed with preparation. I didn't have long to wait. Around 3 p.m., a text came through from her, written like a hostess and not a strategist. "Family dinner tonight, 6:30 sharp. We'd love for you to join. Just a meal." Just a meal. Right. I stared at the screen a full minute before replying, "I'll be there." I didn't go to be gracious. I went to witness on my own terms. At Sixwaus, I got dressed carefully. Not in armor, but not soft either. Navy slacks, silk blouse, hair pinned up, no jewelry, no distractions, just clarity. The drive to Delphine's house was short. We lived only a few miles apart, but that evening it felt like I was crossing state lines. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across her manicured lawn, and the porch lights were already on. Marlowe met me at the door. He didn't try to kiss my cheek or reach for my hand. His hey was quiet, too practiced. He led me inside like a guest, not a wife. The dining room was lit like a catalog photo. Candles, polished silver, linen napkins folded with cruel precision. There were name cards at each seat, as if to remind everyone where they belonged. Mine was right across from Delphine. The rest of the family was already seated. His cousins, an aunt and uncle I'd barely spoken to, even a niece who was probably too young to know what was happening, but old enough to feel the tension. No one made a fuss when I entered. Just murmured greetings, eyes shifting quickly past mine. Dinner began the way these things always do, with small talk and too much butter. Delphine played the doting host. She complimented the roast, smiled at someone's story about their new dog, even poured me a second glass of wine I hadn't asked for. It was choreographed politeness designed to create a normalcy I couldn't trust. Then, somewhere between the salad and the main course, she set her fork down and looked straight at me. "I know things have been tense," she said, "but I think we can all agree it's better to keep things clean and simple." I didn't answer. She picked up her water glass, as if toasting to nothing at all. "Sometimes we make things legal when they don't need to be. That's all I'm saying." I felt a shift in the room, not noise, but an absence of it. The kind that follows a lightning strike no one admits they saw. Her words were calculated. "You're making it legal when it doesn't need to be." Not said in anger, but as a mother correcting a child who'd colored outside the lines. I leaned back in my chair. Legal tends to protect people who've learned not to trust promises. Someone at the far end of the table cleared their throat. Another clinked a glass, too forcefully. Still, no one spoke. Delphine's smile didn't waver. "Lenora, we're family. You're married now. All this paperwork, it sends a message, and not a good one." I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. That's how it works, I thought. Turn private coercion into public correction. If everyone pretends your resistance is bad manners, it becomes easier to label you as the problem. "You think this is about a message," I said, "but it's really about control." "I think it's about harmony," she replied, folding her napkin in her lap like we were still playing house. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't have to be." That line was deliberate, loaded. A final tug on the leash she hoped I hadn't noticed. I felt the weight of every gaze on me. Not angry, not hostile, just expectant. Waiting for me to fall in line, to say something conciliatory, to smooth the wrinkle I'd made in their perfect dinner. Instead, I reached for my wine glass, took a measured sip, and set it down slowly. "I won't be signing anything under pressure," I said, calm as a judge. And that's when it happened, the subtle pause. Forks hovered in midair. Someone stopped chewing. Even the niece, bless her heart, turned to stare at her mother like she could sense we'd slipped out of the family script. No one argued. Delphine sat back in her chair, still smiling, but the light in her eyes dimmed to something else, something colder. "Well," she said, folding her hands, "I guess that's where we are then." The conversation limped on around me, but nothing really resumed. The meal technically continued, but nobody tasted it. They just pushed food around their plates, pretending not to notice the tremor in the center of the table. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. The shift had happened. And Delphine knew it. She didn't try to salvage the evening. She didn't scold, didn't plead. She just watched me, her smile stretching thin at the corners. That smile told me she wasn't finished, and that I'd just been moved to the final round. I left the dinner without saying goodbye. The drive home was quiet, the streets mostly empty. I rolled the window down halfway and let the cold air keep me alert. I didn't turn on music. I didn't need more noise. Everything I needed to hear had already been said, with looks, pauses, and that damn smile. By the next morning, nothing had changed. At least, not on the surface. Marlowe barely said a word. He'd kissed my cheek out of habit before heading off to his office, but it was the kind of kiss you give your neighbor's dog. Meaningless, polite. Late morning, my phone buzzed. It was a calendar invite from Delphine. Subject line, final clarifications. Location, Halstead and Byrne Law Group. Time, 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. No note, no call. Just a formal little ping, dropped like a trap in broad daylight. She was done waiting. I accepted the invite. The next day, I walked into the law office exactly at 11:29. The building was a renovated house, charming, deceptively warm. Inside it smelled like lemon polish and filtered coffee. A receptionist with bright eyes and a tense smile offered me water. which I declined. I was here for clarity, not comfort. They led me to a private conference room. Big table, old wood, a notary already sat near one end, neat stack of folders in front of her. She didn't smile, just nodded. Delphine was next. She arrived 5 minutes late, like she wanted me to wait just long enough to remember who had the upper hand. She wore gray, cashmere probably, and greeted me like a pastor greeting someone late for Sunday service. Marlowe came in with her, quiet as usual. He didn't sit next to me. "Thank you for coming," Delphine began, her voice calm, coaxing. "We wanted to give you one more chance to go over the final documents. No pressure, just transparency." The notary unfolded a manila envelope and began arranging papers like pieces on a chessboard. The pen was already uncapped, waiting. As if the ink had been promised before I even arrived. Delphine took her seat across from me. "It's all very straightforward, Lenora. Nothing surprising. Just finalizing what was discussed." I didn't speak. I scanned the room. Wood-paneled walls, a grandfather clock that didn't tick, filtered light through sheer curtains. Everything in that room had been chosen to feel official and safe. She leaned in slightly, her fingers laced. "This is the last reasonable opportunity to do this without unnecessary drama. I want to avoid tension, for the family's sake, for your marriage." She looked at Marlowe, who nodded faintly but said nothing. His silence wasn't support, it was furniture, expected, inert. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she added. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at the notary, who was sliding the main document toward me now, slowly, like we were sharing a ritual. Delphine gestured lightly toward the pen, a wordless cue. Everyone in that room expected one thing: compliance. I reached forward. I let my hand hover just long enough for the notary to think I was giving in. I picked up the pen, felt its weight, the chill of metal in my fingers. Then I capped it, set it down, and looked directly at Delphine. "I don't sign anything that's already been decided for me," I said. There was a beat of confusion. The notary blinked. Marlowe shifted slightly in his chair. Delphine narrowed her eyes just a fraction. "I don't think you understand how complicated this can become." "You're right," I replied. "It can. That's why I brought backup." The door opened behind me. Nadine walked in, poised, confident, carrying a leather folder and a cool smile. Calder's attorney, and now mine. Delphine's head tilted, just enough to signal annoyance she didn't want to admit. Nadine introduced herself briskly, then placed a new set of documents on the table. "Before anything is signed, Lenora would like these to be reviewed and notarized," she said. "We're introducing amendments that reflect her position and rights. These include updated trust protections, financial oversight clauses, and a revision of spousal authority on jointly held assets." Delphine didn't respond immediately. Her hands were still laced, but tighter now. The knuckles had gone pale. Nadine continued. "Nothing illegal, nothing aggressive, just balanced. Unless, of course, anyone objects to fairness." It was the first time I saw Delphine blink faster than normal. Her smile faltered. The notary adjusted her seat slightly and glanced at me. "Do you have a pen you'd prefer to use?" she asked, professional but curious. I did. I pulled it from my bag. Not the one they laid out for me, but my own. Slim, black. Clicked it once. Signed the new documents deliberately, each page smooth, my signature steady. The room fell into a vacuum. Delphine didn't speak. Marlowe looked down at the table like it had answers carved into the grain. The notary reviewed the documents, stamped, signed, sealed. And the original stack? It sat untouched, still waiting, still open. But the pen they brought for me, uncapped and unclaimed, remained right where they left it. I stood, thanked the notary, and walked out with Nadine behind me. No dramatic exit, no slamming doors, just clean air outside and the clear click of my heels on concrete. I signed once that day, but not the document they came for. The next few weeks passed without much sound. No more meetings, no more pens pushed across glossy tables, no more quiet threats wrapped in polite smiles. Just silence, the kind that hums low in the background, like a fridge you forget is running until it stops. Delphine didn't reach out again, not directly. But I heard things, through neighbors, through secondhand stories that always seemed to end with, "Well, that's not how she tells it." Apparently, I had misunderstood. I had overreacted. I had made a simple legal matter into something emotional. Overcomplicated it, they said. Ruined a family moment with my dramatic timing. Funny thing about truth, it doesn't care how it's retold once it's already done its job. The story kept spinning, but this time I didn't chase it down. I didn't defend or correct. Let them pass it around like a birthday balloon until it lost air. My version lived in files, time-stamped, signed, filed away. I didn't need it to win in conversation. What did surprise me, though, was how the phone calls thinned. Invitations dried up. People who'd once hugged me too long at weddings or sent me cloying Christmas cards suddenly forgot my birthday. Not in a cruel way, just with that specific distance people use when they're not sure what side of a story they're allowed to stand on. I didn't grieve the lost connections. Not really. What hurt more was realizing how conditional some of them had always been. All those polite ties that only held as long as I was agreeable. Still, it stung a little, especially when a cousin I'd once flown cross-country for sent me a one-line email. "Hope you're doing well. No warmth, no follow-up." I didn't reply. Marlowe stayed, not enthusiastically, not angrily, just stayed. He didn't apologize for not speaking up in that room. He didn't explain why he let Delphine speak for both of them, or why he looked so small while she did. He went to work, he paid bills, he picked up dinner. But something had hollowed out between us. We still shared a bed. But there was a polite distance there too, like two diplomats in separate corners of the same treaty. Sometimes he'd ask, "You all right?" Like it was routine, not curiosity. I'd nod. He'd nod back. That was it. I stopped hoping he'd say more, because here's the thing. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't scheming. He just didn't want the weight, didn't want the mess. And I finally saw that for what it was. Avoidance isn't neutrality. It's its own choice. One evening, a few weeks after it all settled, I sat at my desk flipping through a packet of quarterly updates from the company. I wasn't reading them for numbers. I was reading them for tone. And something had shifted. This wasn't just Calder's anymore. The trust documents had done more than protect me legally. They'd re-centered the narrative. My signature wasn't just ink on paper. It was proof I'd paused, considered, and chosen to think. It was proof that I'd had the right to take my time. That company wasn't revenge. It wasn't leverage. It was mine because I didn't let fear make the decision for me. That's what Calder meant when he told me, years ago, "You don't rush the work you're going to live with." At the time, I thought he was talking about accounting. Now I knew he meant everything. I closed the file and moved to the porch. The Texas evening was soft, cool enough to need a sweater. The sky was quiet, not dramatic, just a gentle fade of daylight. I brought my journal with me, not to write a speech or a letter, but to sit with my own thoughts for once without defending them. The pen I carried these days was simple, smooth, black, light in the hand. I uncapped it, twirled it once between my fingers, then placed it on the table beside me. I didn't need to write anything right then. I just liked knowing the pen was mine. There were things I hadn't won. Some people had drifted, some stayed quiet, and likely always would. Marlowe still lived here, but part of him had already moved into a version of life where I was someone he had to adjust around. I accepted that. But I didn't lose myself. I didn't lose the right to pause, to question, to require real answers instead of just polite pressure. Some people call that stubborn, others call it dramatic. I call it knowing better now. Some signatures change your life. Others remind you that it's already yours.